This is Jack McGuirk along with Ken Fraser bringing you this half hour of discussion of issues related to veterans and the active military.
Nice.
Now, here's Ken.
Hey, thanks, Jack. Good afternoon, everyone listening to CaMMVets Media here on WVOX 1460. And as we like to say, CaMMVets stands for Cadets, Midshipmen, the military and veterans that we have proudly been covering since 2008. Big week. We have the Army-Navy game. We'll be down in Philadelphia on Saturday for one of America's iconic games between the two service academies, and a lot of things going on. We were up at branch night at West Point on Thursday night last week, where 944 of the seniors, they call them firsties at West Point, stood up together as a class in Eisenhower Hall, and they were each given an envelope, and on a command they open it and they found out what branch of the U.S. Army they will be heading to. Many cases, about 200 go to infantry, many go to field artillery, armor. Cyber is now a very important branch. About 25 go to cyber, as well as other branches such as the Corps of Engineers, which is very prestigious. And so we had a chance to talk to the guest speaker briefly, General John Abizade, a four-star officer, a member of the class of 1973. And then Saturday we were up at the West Point Holiday Show, and we got a chance to talk to their new conductor, that is Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Tobin. We'll hear from Colonel Tobin in the second half of the show. But Jack, you got some important developments for us.
Yeah, I'll start off with what's happening in Ukraine. The European Union has reached a consensus on a price cap for Russian oil just days before its ban on most imports comes to force. Also, UN's nuclear watchdog hopes to reach an agreement with Russia and Ukraine on protecting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant by year's end. And the U.S. refusal to recognize Ukrainian regions that Moscow has proclaimed annexed as Russian territory would complicate potential peace talks, according to the Kremlin. But Russia is burning through its munitions and stockpiles at extraordinary rates as its invasion of Ukraine continues. This is according to a top intelligence official on Saturday. And Russia does not have the ability to replace those weapons on its own. This is from the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, who was speaking at a fireside chat at the Reagan National Defense Forum at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. Haines said Haines would not provide specific figures on how fast Russia's munitions are depleting, but we did see recently, we were talking about hearing numbers along the lines of, I think it was 20,000 rounds a day.
Well, the Russians have been using, certainly have intensified their field artillery and their missiles that they've been shooting at Ukraine, both military and sadly civilian targets. And they're starting to run out because they did not anticipate a war that was going to be anywhere near this long or this intense. And so they're looking to others for resupply. The NATO countries have been resupplying Ukraine, and it's become a war of attrition. But I don't know. There hasn't been. I heard that I read that the Russians have pushed back a little bit further in the past week. Winter's obviously set in. The question is, how much will the Ukrainians push back? How much are they able to push back to recover land that was taken by the Russians? And and how do you settle this? Mm-hmm. The Ukrainians want just the Russians out of their country, and they're going to want reparations for the damage that the Russians did. Russians aren't going to want a part of that. So I think even how this thing may end may be very difficult.
Indeed, and specifically Russia's reserves of precision munitions are running out the fastest, according to Director Haines. U.S. intelligence community and allies are paying close attention to the health of Russia's munitions stockpiles and how they could be used in other conflicts. Now, Haines said that Russia has obtained some artillery ammunition from North Korea, and that the intelligence community is also tracking those exchanges. Was also saying that Russia is trying to obtain more precision munitions from Iran. And we've talked about Russia getting drones from Iran, so now I guess they're looking to get munitions from Iran as well. And at the same time, the U.S. is looking to replenish its own stockpile, as we've been given a lot of weapons to Ukraine. Raytheon and Lockheed Martin are building about 400 Javelins per month. And Army Secretary Christine Wormwood said that on that same panel that her services pushed a $6 million in contracts to industry to help replenish munitions, which includes the Excalibur artillery rounds built by Raytheon, and
always
advanced
on the
surface
phone
area,
on my
management
right ear.
systems,
And it's a
air defense
habit,
systems,
it's
also
totally a
known as
habit.
the
I never put the receiver on the
NASAMS
left
from
ear.
Raytheon
So
and
if I have
Kongsberg,
to
both to
think
supply
about
Ukraine to
putting it
rebuild
on my
U.S.
left
stocks.
Is
ear,
that $6 billion
just
that
happens
Secretary Ballmer has asked for?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, whatever
that
you're
For
I-
replacing
yeah,
essentially
if I
munitions
think
that
about
they've
it, I'll
been
try, but I don't know if,
providing to
I can probably hear it
Ukraine.
just as
That
well.
was one comment
kind
that
of
when
like
I
this
was
where
at
the
a
funds
press
across
conference
your
that the
body, and then it's
Secretary
like-
had in Washington in
Yes,
October,
It's
it's an
like this,
efficiency
stressed
thing,
that they were
yeah.
not giving
But
I mean, what
just-
I think
munitions
it's
to Ukraine that
most
were from
efficient
the
if you're
strategic
comfortable doing it.
stockpile
If you're comfortable doing something,
for
then
the
you'll
U.S.
be
military.
Yeah,
They're
I
apparently they're
just-
starting to.
Yeah,
But again,
it's
this is
just
becoming a war of
a
attrition
habit,
in
and
Ukraine.
it's
And,
instinctive, I
and,
just do it.
Sadly, the
Okay.
impact is on the people of Ukraine who
But I'll
have their
try. If I'm
houses and their
thinking
lives
about it, I'll
lost
try.
because of the.
I think I feel
strikes
like
by
I
the
can hear
Russians.
better with my right
Indeed,
ear.
and I
Maybe
mentioned the
that's
European
not
Union
true,
reached that
but
consensus on a price cap for Russian oil. The price cap they reached was $60 a barrel, which the Kremlin rejected and said that any countries that were doing that will not get any oil from Russia.
I'll give it a
And there were
try and
some
see what happens.
countries in the European Union that wanted that cap to be
I mean,
lower,
honestly,
around $30,
whatever's
specifically
easiest
Poland
for
and some of the
you.
Baltic
Like,
states
I don't want to
are calling
change.
for a
That's
lower
the
cap
method
on
you
oil.
use, and
But this
go
could be
for
an
it.
issue, this
This
time
is
of
something
year.
I
It's going
don't
to
even
be
think
getting
about,
pretty
I
cold
just
going into
do it
winter.
automatically.
And a lot of people in Europe need the oil to heat their homes, so this is unfortunate.
Yeah, what you see, and I've read, is that the EU is looking to buy as much energy as they can from the United States, from Texas and Louisiana manufacturers, especially natural gas. But they're also going to the Middle Eastern countries and looking to buy there. So it becomes, like dealing with Saudi Arabia. The United States would rather not deal with any more than they have to right now because of the new leadership there. But out of necessity, Europe's got to find oil to get through this winter.
Indeed, and one of those Baltic states is Estonia, and Estonia is also a NATO member, and they're boosting its defense capabilities by acquiring an advanced U.S. rocket artillery system in that Baltic country's largest arm procurement project ever. Now, this deal signed Friday for the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, or the HIMARS. We talked about that a lot on the show previously. Is worth more than $200 million, and includes equipment such as ammunition and rockets, as well as training. The package includes the HIMARS rockets with range of 43 to 186 miles. The Estonian Center for Defense Investment said in a statement. Now, Estonia is a NATO country. It's also in very, very close proximity to Russia. So this is an interesting story. I guess Estonia wanting to build up their defenses.
Well, what you're going to see is the entire NATO border with Russia stocked with missile defense systems like you just described. And, it's an interesting article in the New York Times yesterday by a Yale professor about having to avoid World War III. And he looked at, described the devastation of World War I and World War II and what it takes to prevent a strategic war from breaking out from a situation like this.
And shifting gears a little bit to China, China is building more modern surface combatants and expanding its aircraft carrier and logistics force to grow its naval influence further from shore, according to the Pentagon's annual report on Chinese military power. Now, they're saying at Pentagon, by 2025, the Chinese Navy is expected to grow to 400 hulls, 400 ships, up from its fleet of 340, according to the Pentagon's annual China military report estimates released last week. The Chinese Navy is increasingly as an increasingly modern and flexible force that is focused on replacing its previous generations of platforms that had limited capabilities in favor of large, modern, multi-role combatants. And as of 2021, it's largely composed of modern multi-role platforms featuring advanced anti-ship, anti-air, and anti-submarine weapons and sensors. The report, which sums up the Chinese military's development in 2021, pegs the growth of the People's Liberation Army Navy, adding more major surface combatants. The ship total dipped last year from 355 due to transfer of more than 20 older corvettes in the Chinese Coast Guard. But that's a big number there, 400 ships possibly within the next few years for the Chinese Navy. That's scary.
Well, it depends on what they are, but certainly that is a big increase in strategic naval capability for the Chinese. And they have, have to look at what their aircraft carrier development is. What you look at very closely is what their submarine capability is and their ballistic missile launch capability from submarines. And then the capability of the airplanes, they can fly off of aircraft carriers. That had been one of the questions people had about the Chinese carrier development, is how good their airplanes could be on a carrier, because they were way behind the U.S. a few years, not that long ago.
And interesting story from NASA. NASA's Orion capsule entered orbit, stretching tens of thousands of miles around the moon recently. The capsule was planned to orbit around the moon and come back to Earth. Had dummies on it, and it's NASA's considering a dress rehearsal for the next moon flyby and possibly bringing astronauts back to the moon nearly 50 years after Apollo 17. That's an exciting story. You're listening to the CaMMVets Radio Report on WVOX 1460, heard around the world on WVOX.com. We'll be right back after this brief break, so stay tuned.
Great job, JC.